This is the 2020 Toyota 86 Hakone edition. Now, if I had to specify that this was the 2020 model, it's only because that for their entire life, these cars have remained largely unchanged. There's been a few minor updates. They got a 5 horsepower bump a few years ago, but they kind of got it right the first time around with so many things on this car. It's a really, really driver-friendly, fun, accessible performance car. So what we did is we brought it here to the firm, the Florida International Rally and Motorsports Park, the official test track of Grassroots Motorsports. We're going to take a few laps with it today and see what it is like as a track companion. When you get into a brand new 2020 Toyota 86, it feels just like the cars that came out, you know, gosh, we're going on the better part of 7 or 8 years now. But there wasn't a lot to improve on, and this is a really fun, really friendly chassis. One of the things you always heard about these is they under-tire them, and they put sort of less aggressive tires on them from the factory than the chassis can handle, and they do that to create a little more, just to give you a little less grip, actually, to sort of accentuate how easy and how well balanced the chassis is. And that's kind of true. The tires on here are not something I would choose for a track day, but you absolutely get the sense that you are in complete control of all 4 of the contact patches on this car, which is a really, really thrilling feeling. And I imagine for somebody who's never driven a car on track before, that maybe wants to have their first experience, that takes one of these on track, they're going to be spoiled forever for anything they ever drive on track, because it's so friendly. Like everything you ever hear about, oh, you can hold the car in a 4-wheel drift, or you can trail brake and get more bite on the front tires, or you can accelerate out of a corner and get a little bit of oversteer on corner exit. Everything is true in this car, and it works exactly the way that you've heard about cars are supposed to work, you know, throughout a history of reading car magazines. So for somebody coming at it from a novice point of view, it's just absolutely thrilling. For somebody with more experience, it's also great because you can do anything you want with the car. You can just absolutely put it anywhere you want it. You can drive it, you know, tail out and drift. You can drive it neat and tidy. You can just do whatever you want, and it's just such a lot of fun. And I imagine when you throw more grip at these things, it's just going to get better because the chassis just feels that good. You know, a few nits I can pick. The seating position isn't great. The headroom isn't bad, but I've got to lean the seat back a little bit to get my helmet in here. And I'd like to be a little more upright. I'd like to have the wheel a little bit higher. But these are personal things. This is not make or break decisions. The other thing is the torque dip is real. There is definitely a sort of mid-range loss of torque. In fact, one of the gauges that you get on this is actually a horsepower and torque graph, and right there in the middle there is a noticeable loss of torque right in an area where you want it. But it's not that hard to drive around. In an autocross situation, it might be a little more tricky to drive around, but on a road course, it's not that bad unless you're somewhere where you're between gears. But it's not the end of the world. But overall, just a phenomenally like balance is the word, and the feeling I just keep coming back to, because it's just such a well balanced chassis right off the showroom floor. So the natural comparison to make with this car is to a Miata, to an MX-5, because it's a small 4-cylinder. Front engine, rear drive, well-balanced sports car. Of course, this has a back seat, Miata doesn't, but this has a back seat, sort of in name only. Very similar. I would say the MX-5 is actually a little less direct feeling than this. You get much better feedback through the wheel, through the chassis. They're both very capable chassis. This does a better job at communicating to the driver, I think, than an MX-5 does. And I'm talking showroom for showroom. You can tune both cars to be better at everything. But if we're talking off the showroom floor versus off the showroom floor, highly capable, highly comparable to a Miata, but with a little bit more communication between the chassis and those 4 contact patches and the driver. Okay, let's take a look at the Apex Pro data of our best lap at the firm. So we'll start out with just looking at the G distribution, and we can see it's a well-balanced car. We can see especially a lot of acceleration and cornering going on at the same time in the upper right-hand corner of this G distribution graph. And we can see some pretty good trail braking down in the lower right-hand corner. We don't spend a lot of time in the middle. There are actually a few red dots in the middle. I think this was a lap where I was trying to decide whether to go between 2nd and 3rd in some places, or maybe 3rd and 4th, figuring out which gear to hold. And there was some indecision there, and that's kind of what those red dots represent, is places where I was trying to figure out exactly which gear to be in. Still managed to produce a pretty good lap time though, and it shows you that especially coming off of corners, you can give it a lot of throttle coming off of corners, and still get away with doing a lot of cornering while you're giving it throttle. Now, part of the reason is because the car doesn't have a ton of power, and we can actually see that a little more obviously when we look at the speed trace. If you look at these speed traces, in fact, I'm going to bring in another speed trace here. We'll add a session. We'll go back to our test of the Volkswagen GTI, which produced almost an identical lap time. We'll see the GTI's speed trace in red, and we'll see the Toyota 86's speed trace in blue. Look at these acceleration speed traces here. In fact, let's zoom in on this area in particular, because this is a pretty interesting section. Let me scroll forward to where this is on track. So let's look at this speed trace here. We see both cars are coming out of a tight hairpin, a tight right-hand hairpin, around the same speed, and through the initial acceleration, they both hold fairly consistently. As soon as that 86 shifts into 3rd gear, though, you can see that acceleration curve just drops right off. First, you have the pause to shift, where the Volkswagen with the DSG just keeps pulling, and then the acceleration drops off. You know, the rate of acceleration is still fairly similar, but you know, the time lost to the shift and the little bit less pull mean less speed going into the next big left-hand sweeper. So you can see by the time you get to the end of the straightaway, your speed is in the GTI about 3 miles an hour faster than it is in the 86. So a little more power and less time spent shifting. Now, both of the cars brake well into this sweeping left-hander, but look at the additional speed that the FRS carries around this mostly constant radius for the first part left-hander. That straightaway speed that you lost to the GTI, you've basically gotten back in steady state cornering with the FRS through this left-hander. So it just shows you what a well-balanced, grippy car it is, even on tires that are not the grippiest things in the world. The tires that the 86 comes out of the factory with, really not as sticky as what the GTI was wearing, but because it's such a well-balanced chassis, you've got just great grip and great ability to balance it around these steady state corners, and you're gaining a couple miles an hour back that you lost on the straightaway. But you can see where these lines merge is right where you're getting back on the power to accelerate down the next straight. So as soon as you get back to the gas, the clear horsepower advantage of the GTI just makes up any deficit that it lost in that long corner. So interesting. It just sort of solidifies the notion that the FRS is a fantastic chassis in search of a better engine. So now that we've had our fun with the 86 on the track, let's take it out on the road and see what it's like as a daily driver. If you've driven an 86 before, this would seem very, very familiar to you. Things have not changed all that much over the entire run of the car. A few more high-tech gizmos in here, but it's still the very sort of elemental driving experience that this car was when it came out. There haven't been a lot of improvements because they kind of got it right the first time. So a lot to like inside here. It's elemental, I think, is a better word than raw, because this car does a great job at making you feel connected to the road without being sort of overly harsh. Gives you a lot of feedback without really giving you a lot of edginess, which I think is a really nice touch. It's also such a brilliant size. You have better than maybe any other car on the road right now, you have a great knowledge of where all four corners of this car are relative to what's going on from the driver's seat, which is fantastic on a track car. You always know how to place the car towards an apex or towards an exit, but it's fun on a street car too, because it just really gives you this great connected feel with the world around you. But it still has, you know, a nice comfortable seat, a well-positioned pedals, well-positioned steering wheel, maybe a little bit low for my taste. I'd like the wheel be up just a little bit higher, but very minor quibbles over what is and continues to be, for going on, you know, close to a decade, 8 years now or so, a really, really fantastic, very driver-centric car.
Support brands that support Grassroots Motorsports. Get your chemical solutions from CRC Industries. Visit crcindustries.com to learn more.